I stood behind my own front door and listened to my son pounding on it hard enough to rattle the glass. My daughter was crying, shouting that I couldn't do this to them. The porch light was on, the neighbor's curtains were moving, and somewhere down the street, a dog started barking. I rested my hand on the deadbolt I had installed only 2 hours earlier, closed my eyes, and walked away. "You've ruined our lives," Ethan yelled. "You'll regret this," Megan screamed. Maybe I would. At that moment, I honestly didn't know. My name is David Parker. I'm 58 years old, and I've lived in the same 3-bedroom ranch house on the west side of Columbus, Ohio for almost 30 years. I drove brown UPS trucks for most of my adult life, 31 years to be exact. I worked Christmas rushes, snowstorms, 90-degree summer afternoons, and more overtime than I care to remember. Every extra shift had a purpose. First it was diapers, then braces, then college tuition, then helping my kids get the start I never had. My wife Susan passed away from breast cancer 11 years ago. After the funeral, I promised her I would keep our little family together no matter what. I meant every word. Looking back now, I think I confused keeping them together with protecting them from growing up. When Ethan graduated from Ohio State with a communications degree, he moved back home, just for a few months. When Megan finished studying graphic design at Columbus State Community College, she did the same. I figured they'd save some money, find decent jobs, and move into places of their own before long. That was the plan. Life had other ideas. Months turned into a year, then 2, then 3. The bedrooms I'd expected to become guest rooms stayed exactly the same. Laundry piled up. Food disappeared faster than I could buy it. Amazon boxes showed up on my porch almost every day. Every morning I left for work before 6 with a travel mug of coffee from the Speedway down the road. Every afternoon I came home hoping to hear good news. Instead, I'd find Ethan in the basement with a headset on, shouting into his video game. Megan would be stretched across the couch with her laptop watching design tutorials or scrolling through social media. So I'd ask as casually as I could, "How'd the interview go?" Ethan wouldn't even pause the game. I didn't take it. "Why not?" "They only offered $22 an hour." I blinked. 22 an hour isn't bad. For you, maybe. The words stung more than I ever admitted. A week later, Megan turned down a marketing assistant job. The office had terrible lighting. She told me over microwave leftovers. Besides, they wanted me there by 8. I laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Little by little, I started realizing something that hurt more than losing sleep over bills. My children weren't struggling to find work. They were waiting for a perfect life that didn't exist. And while they waited, I was paying for all of it. The mortgage was finally gone, thank God, but everything else landed on my shoulders. Electricity, internet, car insurance, cell phone plans, groceries, streaming subscriptions, even Ethan's gas money. Whenever I hinted that maybe it was time to start carrying some of the load, both of them reacted like I'd insulted them. "You don't understand our generation," Megan snapped one evening. "You think because you worked yourself to death everybody else should?" Ethan nodded. "You always make us feel guilty." I stood there holding a grocery bag full of chicken milk and cereal I'd just paid for. For a second, I honestly wondered if I'd missed something. Had I become the bad guy without realizing it? I looked around the kitchen. Susan and I had built together one paycheck at a time. Our family photos still hung on the wall. Our old oak table still sat beneath the same light fixture. Everything looked familiar. Everything except the people sitting across from me. And that was the first night I seriously asked myself a question I never thought any father would have to ask. Was loving my children actually hurting them? The next morning started the way most of my mornings did. The alarm went off at 4:45. I poured a cup of coffee into my old insulated mug and drove to the UPS distribution center while most of Columbus was still asleep. By 7 o'clock, I'd already loaded my truck and was weaving through neighborhoods I'd known for years. I delivered packages to office buildings, hardware stores, dentists' offices, and little ranch homes just like mine. One stop always made me smile. A retired couple named Frank and Dorothy lived in Hilliard. Every Tuesday, I'd bring them dog food or something from Amazon. Frank was 81, and he still insisted on carrying the boxes himself. One morning, he chuckled and said, "If I stop moving, Dave, they'll bury me before I'm ready." I laughed. Funny how strangers sometimes leave you with words that stick. Around 6 that evening, I pulled into my driveway. 3 delivery boxes sat on my porch. Again. Inside, Megan was excitedly opening a new tablet she'd ordered. "Oh, this thing is gorgeous," she said. I set my lunch cooler on the counter. "Looks expensive." "It was on sale." "With whose money?" Her smile faded. Before she answered, Ethan walked in carrying an energy drink. "Can we not do this today?" I took a slow breath. "I just got the credit card bill." So, there are almost $400 in online purchases. They're necessities. I looked around. The new tablet, wireless earbuds, a gaming keyboard, a ring light, designer sneakers still sitting in the box by the front door. I couldn't remember the last time I'd bought something just because I wanted it. "I've been thinking," I said carefully. "Costco is hiring. They start over $20 an hour with benefits." Ethan rolled his eyes. "I already told you, that's not the kind of career I'm looking for. It doesn't have to be forever. I'm not stocking shelves after getting a college degree." Megan crossed her arms. "And I didn't spend years studying design just to answer phones or make flyers." I almost smiled. Years later, she'd make a living designing flyers. Life has a funny sense of humor. Back then, though, there wasn't anything funny about it. "I'm not asking you to settle," I said. "I'm asking you to start somewhere." "You just don't get it," Ethan replied. "People your age think suffering is some kind of badge of honor." "No," I kept my voice calm. "I think paying your own bills is part of being an adult." The room went quiet. Then Megan pushed her chair back. "You always make us feel like failures." "I didn't say that." "You don't have to." "You know what," Ethan added. "Mom would have understood us." That one landed like a punch to the chest. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, I said quietly, "Don't use your mother that way." He looked away. I grabbed my keys and walked back outside before I said something I'd regret. Instead of going inside again, I sat in my pickup in the driveway. The engine was off. The windows were cracked. I watched the porch light come on as the sun disappeared behind the trees. For the first time in my life, I didn't want to go into my own house. That scared me. A few days later, my younger sister Linda drove over with a casserole. She'd noticed I'd sounded tired on the phone. After dinner, she asked the question I'd been avoiding. "David, are they even trying anymore?" I stared at my plate. "I honestly don't know." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I think you do." I didn't answer, because deep down, I already knew the truth. My children weren't trapped. They were comfortable. And I was the one making that comfort possible. Linda's words stayed with me for days. Not because they were cruel, because they were true. I kept hoping something would happen. Maybe Ethan would finally accept one of the interviews he kept scheduling and canceling. Maybe Megan would land a design job that lit a fire under her. Maybe they'd wake up one morning and decide enough was enough. Instead, life settled into the same routine. I went to work. They stayed home. I paid the bills. They planned their next purchase. One Saturday morning, I found a stack of unopened envelopes on the kitchen counter. Electric, internet, water, the credit card statement, all addressed to me. Next to them sat a receipt for $83 from DoorDash. I picked it up. "Who spent $83 on lunch?" Ethan looked up from his phone. "We ordered for a few friends." A few friends. They were hanging out. I looked around the house. There were 4 young men in my living room watching college football. Empty soda cans covered the coffee table. Someone had left pizza grease on Susan's old quilt. Nobody even stood up to introduce themselves. Nobody said thank you. It was like I didn't exist. After they finally left that evening, I walked through the house, picking up paper plates and empty cups. Megan came into the kitchen. "You don't have to clean up." "I know." She hesitated. Then she went back upstairs. I finished cleaning by myself. As I rinsed dishes at the sink, I caught my reflection in the window. I looked older than 58. My shoulders slumped, dark circles under my eyes. I remembered something my pastor, Reverend Collins, had said one Sunday. Peace doesn't disappear all at once. Sometimes it leaves one small compromise at a time. Mine had been disappearing for years. The following Wednesday, I asked Ethan to ride with me to Home Depot. The truck was quiet until we pulled into the parking lot. You know why I asked you to come? He shrugged. No. They're hiring. He sighed loudly. Dad, hear me out. They start people at decent pay, benefits, retirement. You like working with your hands. I didn't go to college to push lumber carts. No one says you have to stay forever. I deserve something better. I turned off the engine. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I said something I never planned to say. When I was your age, I deserved a lot of things too. He frowned. I deserved to have my wife grow old with me. His expression changed. I deserved to watch your mother retire. I deserved to spend fewer nights working overtime. I looked straight ahead through the windshield. But life doesn't hand out what we deserve. It hands us opportunities, and then it watches to see what we do with them. Ethan stared at his knees. I still don't want this job. I know. He opened the door and got out, not to apply, just to wait outside while I bought fertilizer for the lawn. That night I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m, I walked into the backyard. The grass needed cutting. The fence leaned a little. Susan's flower beds were full of weeds. For years I'd told myself I was keeping this house together for my children. Standing there in the cool Ohio air, another thought finally entered my mind. Maybe I was keeping them from ever building lives of their own. The next morning I called Reverend Collins. Pastor, I said quietly, I think I need some advice. He was silent for a second. Then he answered with words that changed everything. Come by the church, David. I've been praying you'd make that call. Reverend Collins didn't tell me what I wanted to hear. He told me what I needed to hear. We sat in his office at Grace Community Church on a rainy Thursday afternoon. The room smelled faintly of old books and coffee. A Bible sat open on his desk, but he never pointed to it. He simply listened. For nearly an hour I talked. About Susan. About the promises I'd made after she died. About the overtime, the bills, the guilt. When I finally ran out of words, he folded his hands. David, he said gently, who are you trying to save? My children. Are they asking to be saved? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. He nodded. Sometimes love feeds people. He paused. And sometimes love lets people get hungry enough to feed themselves. I drove home in silence. For the next few weeks, I wrestled with that conversation every single day. I'd wake up convinced I had to do something. By lunchtime, I'd convince myself I was overreacting. By bedtime, I'd remember Ethan laughing at another job offer, or Megan complaining that grocery prices had gone up as if she were the one paying for them. I felt trapped between being a father and being an enabler. Then one evening, I stopped by my sister Linda's house after work. She poured us each a cup of coffee. Before I could say a word, she looked me straight in the eye. You're exhausted. I'll be okay. No, she said quietly. You're disappearing. I looked away. I don't know how to stop. Linda reached across the table. You stop confusing guilt with love. That sentence stayed with me. The following Saturday, I made the hardest decision of my life. Not out of anger, not to punish them, but because I finally realized I was helping them stay exactly where they were. I rented a climate-controlled storage unit on the east side of town and paid the first month's rent. I booked each of them a week at an extended stay motel. I printed a list of employers hiring within 15 miles of our house: Home Depot, Costco, Kroger, FedEx, the City Transit Authority, 2 warehouses, and a local print shop. Then I bought new deadbolts. Installing them nearly broke me. I must have taken the old locks off 3 different times before forcing myself to finish. That afternoon, I packed their belongings carefully, not tossed, not dumped into trash bags, folded, labeled, photographs wrapped in towels. Susan had always taught me to treat people's things with respect. I wasn't about to forget that now. When Ethan and Megan came home, they thought someone had broken into the house. Then they saw their boxes stacked neatly in the garage. What is this? Ethan demanded. I handed him the storage key and the motel reservation. What the hell is this? It's your chance. Megan stared at me. You're kicking us out? I'm telling you, it's time to build your own lives. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious. The shouting started almost immediately. They called me selfish, heartless, A terrible father. Neighbors stepped onto their porches. Someone called the police. When the officer arrived, he listened quietly to both sides. Then he turned to me. "Sir, are they tenants paying rent?" "No," he nodded. After checking everything, he handed Ethan the motel paperwork. "Your dad's given you more help than most people get." The officer wished us all luck and drove away. An hour later, my children loaded the last box into Ethan's car. Neither of them looked back. I watched their taillights disappear down the street. Then I went inside. The house had never been so quiet, or so empty. I sat alone at the kitchen table Susan and I had bought 29 years earlier, and cried until there were no tears left. The first morning after they left, I still set out 3 coffee mugs. Old habits don't disappear overnight. I stood there staring at them for a second before putting 2 back into the cabinet. That was harder than changing the locks. For the next few months, I buried myself in work. If the supervisor needed someone to cover another route, I volunteered. Saturday deliveries. Sure. Holiday overtime. Absolutely. The longer I stayed behind the wheel of that brown truck, the less time I had to think about the silence waiting for me at home. But silence has a way of catching up with you. Every evening, I'd unlock the front door and the house would greet me with nothing. No television. No arguments. No dirty dishes piled in the sink. No shoes scattered by the front door. I'd heat up a frozen dinner eat at the kitchen island instead of the dining table, then watch half an hour of the local news before going to bed. It wasn't peaceful. It was empty. I kept wondering where Ethan and Megan were sleeping. Did they have enough to eat? Were they safe? Had they found jobs? A dozen times I picked up my phone to call. A dozen times I put it back down. If I rescued them now, I'd only be undoing the hardest decision I'd ever made. By spring, I'd lost nearly 15 pounds. One afternoon, Frank, the retired man on my UPS route, looked at me and frowned. "You all right, Dave?" "I'm fine," he chuckled. "No man who's fine says I'm fine like that." That evening, I looked in the bathroom mirror. He was right. I looked tired. Not from work, from carrying guilt that had nowhere to go. A few weeks later, I sat on a bench outside Grace Community Church after the Wednesday Bible study. Reverend Collins joined me. "You still working all that overtime?" I nodded. "It keeps me busy." "Or keeps you from going home?" That question hit me harder than I expected, because I knew the answer. I wasn't working for the paycheck anymore. I was hiding inside the job. At 61, I had enough saved to retire earlier than I'd planned. Susan and I had always been careful with money. The mortgage was gone. The truck was paid off. My pension would cover my needs. 2 months later, I turned in my uniform. On my last day, the guys at the depot gave me a cake and a fishing gift card. Driving home, I felt strangely nervous. For the first time in decades, I had nowhere I needed to be. A week later, Linda talked me into visiting the county animal shelter. "I just want to look," I told her. That lasted about 5 minutes. An older golden retriever mix walked over, leaned against my leg, and sighed like he'd known me forever. His tag said, "Buddy." I knelt down and scratched behind his ears. "You look like you've had a rough few years, too." He wagged his tail once. That afternoon, Buddy came home with me. Life slowly found a new rhythm. Every morning before sunrise, Buddy and I walked through the neighborhood. People I'd never met before stopped to chat. After breakfast, I'd spend a couple of hours turning Susan's neglected flower beds into a vegetable garden. Tomatoes, green beans, peppers, cucumbers. I'd forgotten how satisfying it felt to grow something with my own hands. 3 afternoons a week, I volunteered through church, helping unload donated food or visiting shut-ins who didn't have family nearby. Most evenings, a handful of us retirees gathered in the fellowship hall for coffee cards and conversation. Nobody there knew everything about my story, but the ones who did all said the same thing. "You didn't stop loving your children. You finally gave them the chance to become adults." For a long time, I wasn't sure I believed them. Then one quiet October morning, while Buddy chased squirrels across the backyard, and I knelt pulling weeds from the garden, I realized something. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for my life to begin again. I was already living it. 3 Christmases came and went. I prayed for Ethan and Megan every single night. I just stopped praying they'd come home. Then 4 days before Christmas, someone knocked on my front door. Buddy barked once. I looked through the sidelight window, and my heart nearly stopped. Buddy reached the front door before I did. His tail wagged once, then he looked back at me as if he already knew whoever stood outside mattered. I opened the door slowly. For a second, I honestly wondered if I was imagining things. Ethan stood there with both hands shoved into the pockets of an old work jacket. His hair was shorter than I remembered, and there was a faint scar above one eyebrow. He'd lost the soft look he used to have. His hands were rough, the kind that come from doing real work every day. Beside him stood Megan. She looked older too. Not older in years, older in life. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and there were dark circles under her eyes that no makeup could completely hide. She was holding the tiny hand of a little blonde girl bundled up in a red winter coat. The little girl looked up at me with wide blue eyes. She smiled. "Hi." Nobody else said a word. I couldn't. Buddy walked over and gently sniffed the little girl's mitten. She giggled. "Doggy." Megan finally spoke. "Hi, Dad." Her voice cracked on the last word. I stepped aside. "You'd better come in. It's cold." For the first 10 minutes, we mostly talked about the weather. People do that when they're afraid of saying the thing that really matters. The little girl sat on my living room rug, throwing Buddy's tennis ball across the floor. Buddy looked 20 years younger. He chased it every time. Finally, Megan broke the silence. "This is Lily." I smiled at the little girl. "Hello, Lily." She waved. "I'm two." Everyone laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd heard from my children in years. Megan looked at Lily. "Can you tell Grandpa what you asked Mommy last week?" Lily nodded proudly. I said, "Why everybody got grandpas?" She frowned, trying to remember. "And I don't." The room became very quiet. Megan lowered her head. She asked why her friend Emma gets cookies with Grandpa every Saturday. A tear rolled down her cheek. I didn't know how to answer. She took a deep breath. "So, I called Ethan." Ethan stared at the floor. We talked for almost 3 hours that night. "What about you?" He laughed softly. "The funny thing is, for the first 6 months after you kicked us out, all we did was blame you." Megan nodded. "We told everybody you abandoned us." I figured. She looked embarrassed. "We actually believed it." Then Ethan leaned forward. "You know what changed." I shook my head. "My landlord didn't care that I had a degree." That caught me off guard. "He wanted the rent on the first." Megan smiled through her tears. "The grocery store didn't care either. Neither did the electric company. Or the insurance company." Ethan rubbed his hands together. "My first full-time job was unloading delivery trucks at a warehouse." I couldn't help smiling. "How was it?" "I hated it." We both laughed. "For about 3 weeks." "What happened after that?" "I started liking my paycheck." That answer made me laugh even harder. Megan reached into her purse and pulled out her laptop. I never found some fancy design agency. She opened a folder filled with colorful advertisements. I designed flyers. For local restaurants, churches, landscaping companies, little businesses. I work from home now. It isn't glamorous, but it's honest. She smiled. And clients can be exhausting. I looked at both of them. Not once had they complained. Not once had they blamed anyone else. That was when I realized something remarkable. The 2 young people sitting in my living room weren't the same ones I'd watched drive away 3 years earlier. They'd finally met the teacher I'd been trying to introduce them to all along. Life. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of bacon. For a second, I thought I was dreaming. Then Buddy jumped off my bed and trotted toward the kitchen. I followed him. Megan was standing at the stove in one of Susan's old aprons. I hadn't seen anyone wear it in years. She looked over her shoulder. "Hope you don't mind. I found eggs in the fridge." "I don't mind at all." Lily was sitting at the table coloring with a box of crayons Ethan had picked up at a drugstore the night before. She looked up and smiled. "Morning, Grandpa." Those 2 words settled somewhere deep inside me. Not because I had earned them overnight, because I thought I never would. After breakfast, I automatically reached for the plates. Megan gently touched my arm. I've got it. You don't have to. I know, she smiled. I want to. There was no speech, no dramatic apology. She simply rolled up her sleeves and started washing dishes. About an hour later, I heard metal clanking in the hallway bathroom. Ethan was lying on his back under the sink. What are you doing? He held up a rusty faucet cartridge. This thing's been leaking for months. I was going to get around to it. He grinned. You always said that. He drove to Lowe's, came back with the replacement part, and had the faucet working in less than half an hour. Before lunch, he noticed the porch light flickering. By mid-afternoon, he'd replaced the bulb, tightened the loose fixture, and repaired one of the handrails I'd been meaning to fix since the previous spring. I never asked him to do any of it. He just noticed. That evening, Megan was sitting at the dining room table with her laptop. Every few minutes, she'd switch from answering client emails to helping Lily stack building blocks. She rubbed her forehead. Everything okay? I asked. She laughed. My biggest client changed the whole flyer after approving it yesterday. Ouch. And they still want it by tomorrow morning. I smiled. Welcome to the working world. She laughed too. I know. It's not exactly the glamorous career I imagined. But you know what? I actually like earning my own money. Late that afternoon, Ethan disappeared for a while. When he came back, he and Megan carried something wrapped in a moving blanket. They set it on the front porch. What's this? I asked. Merry Christmas, Ethan said. They pulled away the blanket. It was a beautiful wooden rocking chair. Solid oak, simple, built to last. I stared at it. You two spent too much. We really didn't, Megan said. We saved for it. Ethan shrugged. We argued about what to get you. I wanted new garden tools. I wanted a smoker, Megan admitted with a laugh. Then we realized. She looked toward the porch steps. Every time we pictured you over the last 3 years, you were sitting out there with Buddy. So we thought, you deserved a better place to sit. For a long moment, I couldn't find the words. Finally, I lowered myself into the chair. It rocked smoothly. Buddy curled up beside my boots as if he'd been waiting for it all along. A few seconds later, Lily climbed into my lap without asking. She leaned her head against my chest. Nobody spoke. The porch overlooked the little vegetable garden I'd spent 3 summers growing. Christmas lights twinkled along the fence. Inside the house, I could hear Megan laughing at something Ethan had said. 3 years ago, this porch had been the place where I watched my children drive away believing I had stopped loving them. Now, it was the place where I realized they had finally learned what love had been asking of them all along. The morning after Christmas, I woke up earlier than everyone else. I had always been an early riser. 30 years of driving a UPS truck had trained my body to wake up before the sun, even long after I retired. But that morning felt different. I stood in the kitchen holding a cup of coffee, listening to the quiet sounds coming from the hallway. A little laugh, small footsteps, the sound of my granddaughter waking up and calling for her mother. For years, I had dreamed about hearing something like that in my house again. Not because I wanted my old life back, because I missed being a father. I missed the simple things. I missed hearing my children come through the front door after school. I missed making pancakes on Saturday mornings. I missed knowing what was happening in their lives. But I had learned something important during those 3 lonely years. Love doesn't mean allowing someone to keep hurting themselves, and it doesn't mean letting them hurt you because you are afraid of losing them. After breakfast, Ethan and Megan helped me clean up the house before they left. It was strange seeing them move around like adults. 3 years earlier, they had stood outside that same front door angry and broken, believing I had destroyed their lives. Ethan had screamed that I had ruined everything. Megan had cried and told me I didn't love them. I remember standing behind that door, my hand resting on the lock, fighting every instinct inside me that wanted to open it. But that day, I had made the hardest decision of my life. I chose their future over their comfort. And now, standing in my kitchen, watching them pack their bags, I finally understood that decision had mattered. Before they walked outside, I stopped them. There is something I want you both to understand. They turned around. I looked at my son and daughter, the 2 people I had spent my whole life protecting. My door will always be open to you. Megan's eyes filled with tears. But this house can never become a place where you come to hide from life again. Nobody spoke. I continued. This will always be your home in the sense that you are my family. You can come here for Christmas. You can bring my granddaughter here. You can call me when you need advice. I paused. But I will never go back to being the person who carries everything while you stand still. Ethan looked down at the floor. Then he nodded. I understand, Dad. And that meant more to me than any apology, because 3 years ago they would have argued. They would have told me I was being unfair. They would have found someone else to blame. But this time, they listened. There was no anger, no resentment, just understanding. After they left, I walked out onto the porch. The wooden rocking chair they gave me sat there quietly catching the morning sunlight. I sat down and my old rescue dog walked over and rested beside my feet. I looked out at my small backyard garden, the same garden I had planted during the years when I thought I might never see my children again. For a long time, I believed changing those locks meant I had lost my family. I thought I had pushed my children away forever. But I was wrong. Those locks were never about keeping them out. They were about giving them the chance to finally find their way in. 3 years ago, I closed my front door on my children. That Christmas, as I rocked my granddaughter to sleep on my porch, I realized I hadn't lost my family. I had finally helped them find their way home. If this story touched your heart, I hope you'll share it with someone who understands that love isn't always about making life easier for the people we care about. Sometimes real love means having the courage to set boundaries, even when it hurts. And if you'd like to hear more true-to-life family stories about forgiveness, second chances, and the moments that change us forever, I would be honored to have you join me again for the next story. Thank you for listening.